Hey, and welcome to the show. Pete, today let's talk about something a little bit different. Man, I'm on like a lot of these social media groups or like these, wholesale and real estate groups on Facebook. And a lot of new people, they say this thing: how do I find good deals
Hmm.
in real estate? And or sellers that want to give me a good deal. I mean, what do you say about that?
Well, look, the reality of it is this. This is what the whole real estate investing business is based upon,
Mm-hmm.
right? Seller motivation. Um, this is the other thing I learned. A lot of people don't even understand that whole concept, like the definition of seller motivation, right? And like the way I like to describe it is there's
Mm-hmm.
two types of sellers out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's what I call the retail seller, and there's what I call the wholesale seller.
Mm-hmm.
The retail seller is the seller. It's like
They
uh,
want to sell their
they just want to
house.
sell their house. Like
Mhm.
they might, whatever. They just want to. They're ready to move
Mhm.
on. They're not motivated from a standpoint. The two factors that they're not motivated in. Number one, they're not motivated from a time perspective. Like they don't need to do it tonight. They don't need to do it this week, right? They're not motivated that, and they're not hurting financially,
Mhm.
right? And if those two factors don't exist, you're what's called a retail seller, and those really fall into families. Like when
Yeah.
one family moves from one house and moves to the other. That's not the world that we as investors are in. The world that you and I are in, and this is what everyone's chasing out there. We're in what I call the wholesale world. The
Mhm.
wholesale world, when a seller is selling, they have one of these two motivating factors. In a perfect case scenario, they have both motivating factors. And A,
Mhm.
they're limited on time for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And two, they're limited on money
Yeah.
for whatever reason. So either one of those motivations exists, you create these motivated sellers. If both of those motivations exist, you create a super duper motivated seller. So, so now that we kind of have that defined, let's talk a little bit about.
So would you say then that like it's not you're really looking for good deals, you're looking for motivation.
Yeah, that's the bottom line.
Mhm.
Now let's face it. Sometimes these motivation factors make identifiable good deals, right? Like you
Mhm.
talk about it all the time because you're like
Mhm.
the master of driving for dollars. So what would be some things that somebody could see from that? We'll talk about the things that happen in people's lives that create motivation. But you've gotten incredible deals. I think you just bought a house for yourself.
Mhm.
By just driving around. So is it actually possible to find a potentially motivated seller by just driving around?
Oh God, absolutely. And it's like, driving for dollars. People are like, oh, I don't want to do that. Or that's an old school way of doing things. I mean, in life, some old school things go out of style,
Yeah.
right? But some things are always going to be true. So let's talk about, I guess, that scenario and why that's such a great thing. You can tell a lot about a person and about a home just by looking at it driving down the road,
Hmm.
right? I can tell a lot about a house just by looking at it. So,
Like how?
well, if you're looking at a house and you're looking for somebody in motivation, right? So let's say there's snow all over the ground. It's the middle of winter, and
Okay.
there's not one footprint in the ground anywhere in the yard. No
Possibly.
one lives there, right? So it's possibly a vacant home. Well, let's say that the landscape of the house is just it's humongous. It's growing it's growing up bigger than the house, the shrubs on the side. What does that tell me?
No one's taking care of it.
Nobody's taking care of it. The eaves and overhangs are rotten. A tarp on the roof, old cars in the yard, trash strewed everywhere, sheets in the windows instead of blinds. That tells me motivation. I would say most people that have a home, their home, they're really proud of it, right? I mean,
Mhm.
go look at Home Depot in the spring and look at how many people are buying little plants and doing like maybe painting and things like that. They do that because you have pride in what you own. When you're driving around and you see a property that's in a distressed situation, what that tells me is there's probably some type of motivation there, right? There is a reason why this house has got to the situation that it's in. There's probably a motivating factor behind that.
Okay, so if I hear you, I just want to summarize. You're talking about the snow. So an empty property, right,
Hmm.
is one of those. You're talking about, overgrown stuff. So property that's not taken care of. So are there other things that I should be looking out for if I'm a, kind of beginner and real estate investor, or doesn't have to be beginner investor? Other things that potentially I could see from the outside looking in? Because I'll tell you, this is a big one, Julie. A lot of people, they just don't feel comfortable getting on that phone and just to certainly randomly calling.
Yeah.
But if they could identify like 20 what I would call hot leads, those are a little bit easier to call on. So
I
potentially
think this
abandoned.
is the easiest lead to call on out of anything.
I'd agree. So what else? Potentially abandoned, potentially overgrown. Anything else that somebody could be looking out for?
I mean, like I said, garbage strode everywhere, a bunch of old vehicles, four wheelers, just junk everywhere, right? The house in disrepair. Like, for instance, this is like not after a hurricane, but a tarp on a roof. So, a tarp is like
Yep.
really blue in color.
Mm-hmm.
You could see a tarp that's been out in the weather for a long time. It's going to start turning light blue to white.
Yep.
When you've got a tarp on a roof, the reason for that is because there's a leak in the roof.
Yep.
So you put the tarp on the roof to obviously stop the leaking. Well, if a tarp's been there a long time and they're using the tarp to stop the leaking of the roof, that tells me one thing. They don't have the money to replace
Right.
the roof.
Yep.
Right? So to me, there's motivation in that. When a house isn't taken care of, like this is rotten, maybe the strips around the windows are rotten, the porch is falling in, you're getting into a deeper hole. You cannot let a house sit untaken care of. You cannot let a house sit vacant either. So when there's not snow on on the ground, or
Yep.
there's lots of leaves everywhere, that's a vacant home. The worst thing you could do ever as an owner, whether you've been gifted a house, whether you bought it and you decide not to live there anymore and you let a house sit vacant. Woo, that's the worst thing you could ever do, right, Peter?
Yeah, no question about it. But let's talk about the other side of the equation now. So now we've identified that there's ways that you could visually identify a potential motivated seller. But there's also behind the scenes stuff that takes place.
Oh, yeah.
Something that might not be apparent by looking at the house. Something that and we always talk about it, it's something that actually takes place inside these people's lives.
Yeah.
And so, like, from my perspective, there's some big ones, right? There's some big ones. Like for instance, what creates a motivate? By the way, this is very important to understand when looking for motivated sellers. Life events create motivated sellers.
Yeah.
Life events create motivated sellers. So, for instance, like a divorce can create a motivated seller, right? Because now all of a sudden you got a timeline. Maybe there's a divorce decree that says, okay, this property needs to be sold. A divorce can create a potentially motivated seller because there's just not enough money to go around, right? When you had two incomes coming in, you could afford that house. Now all of a sudden you've been granted that house in a divorce, and you're a one income family. You may not be able to identify that. A potential death, right? A potential death could create a motivation, because what happens many times in a death, properties are willed. And many times they're not even willed to whoever wants that property, right? They're willed to kids who want nothing to do with that. Or maybe they're willed to spouses and they don't want to have extra houses. They might live in one house and, their spouse had a couple rentals, and now the wife takes over and she wants nothing to do with that. What are some other motivating factors that could take place in someone's life to create motivation?
I mean, like for me, the biggest ones is like a pre-foreclosure, right? Which it kind of goes around maybe a divorce situation, death, divorce, moving. You want to find high motivation. Well, let's just take pre-foreclosure, for instance.
Yep.
Right now, there's lots of people in pre-foreclosure, right? And what that means is that the bank has went and served a list pendants, which is basically what, a lawsuit, against this person because they've given you a loan. You're not able to pay the loan, so a lawsuit has been filed stating that, like, hey, you have not paid us. You are going to lose your house to foreclosure if you haven't paid us. I mean, how much more motivated could you be? By the way, in a pre-foreclosure situation, once your house is foreclosed on, it's on your credit for like 7 years. It's embarrassing because it's public knowledge. Everybody knows about it, right?
Yep.
But as an investor, like, what can we do? Like, how would you help somebody in that situation? And I mean, we're working with people right now.
Here's the reality of it. Whether it's that situation, a health issue, a kid issue, upsize, downsize issue, a divorce issue, I got to move out of town issue. And this is very important for people to understand, Julie. And I know you see it this way, and I know I do too. We're truly helping people. A lot of times people think, well, in order to be a successful real estate investor, you have to take advantage of someone. And that's just not true. It's just not true.
That's what bad investors do.
Well, and let's face it, every industry has some bad apples in it.
Some crappy people that care more about themselves than other people.
That has nothing to do with real estate investing. That just has to do with life.
Yeah.
But the reality is, we as real estate investors, we're out there helping people. See, what a lot of people don't realize in these motivating factors is that a lot of these people don't have the luxury of just selling their property. Because, again, remember, we have a retail seller and we have a wholesale seller. Now, remember, we already talked about on the retail side, there's no motivation of time or money or both. On the wholesale side, there is that motivation. Well, guess what? On the retail side, you also have you have to have the ability to bring the right kind of product out to the market, and you better have the ability to sit on that product for a while. And in these motivating factors, a lot of times people just don't have either, right? They don't have the luxury of time and the luxury to fix their property up. And really, they find themselves stuck. They find themselves stuck. You're in pre-foreclosure. You obviously have a limited amount of time, sometimes as little as 90 days, sometimes even less than that amount of time. And let's face it, if you take a property to the retail market, you can't many times sell a property, market.
No, and then the emotional state of
plus
being,
on top of that,
the emotional state of being proud that you bought this home and that now that you can't pay for it, that it's going to be gone and that you're going to have to live somewhere else, that you may be kicked out, right? Like, that's emotional.
No, that's absolutely huge. And, a lot of times we don't even consider those factors. But when we tell people that we as investors, we really come to people's rescue, we really, really do. Well, hopefully at this point, we've got you convinced that that there's plenty of opportunities for us to do deals and for us to help people. Julie, let's talk for a moment, like, how do you find this stuff? Outside of just driving around, and we know that sometimes the property just raises its hand and screams. But like, I'll give you a couple examples, and then maybe you could talk a little bit about how the technology works. But the good thing is, the reality of it is, all of these motivating factors, almost across the board, are public information.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, a foreclosure, a pending, a pre-foreclosure situation, that is public information. And so, if you're an investor in anywhere USA, you could literally grab that information from local places. They have to make them public, so there's publications that you can get that information. Sometimes not sometimes, but across the board, divorces is public information. I could tell you, no matter where you live in the United States, if you just think divorces, again, it's public information. They're in public records, and specifically start contacting the people that go through divorce. That's a huge thing. You know what else is public information? When companies go out of business. You take it like where we are in Atlanta, and all of a sudden you have a huge company go out of business. Well, guess what? That immediately creates motivation within that workforce. So almost all of these situations become public. But talk a little bit about like technology we have and that maybe people can get access to, how you could actually do that from a technology perspective. Find these types of motivated sellers.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, Peter, because like back in the day, we're still real young, right? But back in the day, To get this public information, you need to go to your clerk's office, go to the county, go to the city,
Yep.
and find out this information. The beautiful thing is now all of this information is aggregated. Okay. It can be sorted, it could be manipulated, it could be what I like to call list stacking. So right now we have technology. You can visit that at dealdriven.com. It is an app that we've created along with some other partners where you can like legitly go on there in your area, search everybody in your area. Let's take pre-foreclosures, for instance. I can find everybody that's in pre-foreclosure in this area that owns a single-family home, duplex, triplex, quads, townhomes, condos, multifamily, land. And once I found all those people, I can break it down even more, such as equity. Right? Equity is the difference between what someone owes in their mortgage and what the property's worth. Generally, the equity is going to be where your profit is, right? So I could stack all of these factors on top of each other. Then once I have my list, I can then market to my list. I can do so. You could handwrite them letters. You could send direct mail. You could call them. Like literally, you could do this act of skip tracing to find their phone numbers and pick up the phone and call them, right? So you then have active marketing. What used to take hours and hours and hours can be done in minutes. So, I mean, to me, there's no excuse not to find the motivation because it's so easy to get, right? Tax delinquents, vacants, non-owner occupied. There's places where you could go find probates. I mean, just all of these reasons that you might see motivation in a seller, you could find literally with a click of a button.
No question. Well, let's do this. We've talked about how somebody can identify just by looking at a house of motivation. We talked about behind the scenes, what creates motivation. We talked about the resources to get this. Let's finish off by just talking a little bit, and I know you and I differ a little bit on this last point. Let's talk a little bit about how to potentially talk to somebody that's motivated. You know, my approach is a very simple approach. I like to go broad. What I mean by that is, look, if I know you're in pre-foreclosure, I don't need to bring up to you that you're in pre-foreclosure. My approach is I'm going to go broad. If I know there's something that exists in your world, I'm going to approach you. But I'm not going to approach you from that perspective because I think what that does is that gets people potentially defensive. I think that people potentially, you can embarrass someone. So from day one, when I started contacting sellers to today, I approach people, Julie, in a very broad perspective. My name is so-and-so. I'm a local investor. I understand you have a house. And would you be interested in selling that house? I also love that broad approach because it also encompasses something beyond that one house, right? Let's say they're out of the problem with that house. Let's say that house maybe isn't even sold. Maybe that's not even an issue, but maybe they own 10 other houses on the side. So I like to go broad, again, from a standpoint of not turning people off, not embarrassing them, not putting them on the spot, and go broad from a perspective of catching anything else, you know, casting a wide net, catching anything else to go there. I know you're different with that a little bit. Talk a little about your approach.
Well, I mean, I think we could do a whole show on that. So go ahead and check it out. We'll have something come up about motivated sellers. But I love your approach, right? I'm a little bit more of relationship building to where I want to get to and trying to get information out of them so I can be a problem solver. You know, really, a lot of people, when you're talking to a seller, you're trying to find motivation, your first thought is, can I get a deal? Can I get a deal? You know, I like to think of it as, how can I solve your problem? How can I solve your problem, whether it benefits me or it doesn't benefit me? Because either way, I want to solve their problem. And you're like, Julie, why would you want to do that? I want to do that because, number one, I care about people. But number two is, just because I may not do business with them, if I build a relationship with them and try to help to the best of my abilities, those people know people. So if I'm known as my community as a problem solver, as somebody that wants to help, I'm looking for those referrals too, right? So I think our approach is similar, right? It's just the way we come about it. Plus, you and I personalities are just completely different anyway. But I think the main thing here is you don't find the best deals on the market. You don't find the best deals with other people, with intermediaries. You find the best deals by finding sellers with motivation. And then from what you do with that next is what's going to make or break you. Or if you do something with that next, that's going to make you or break you.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. Guys, the bottom line is there's plenty of opportunities for us as investors to make a lot of money and plenty of opportunities as investors to help a lot of people. But the key is, like Julie said, you got to get out there and you got to make it happen. So on behalf of myself and Julie, thanks for watching our show. We look forward to connecting with you very, very soon.